At the end of today's story, I'm going to show you a photo that has a disturbing backstory. And the story I am about to tell you is that disturbing backstory. So make sure that you watch the whole video from start to finish so that it all comes together and makes sense at the end. And I hope you enjoyed today's story so much that you decide to like, subscribe, and leave a comment to let me know. And if you find today's secret in the background, type in the comments the timestamp, and I will pin the first correct answer. Okay, let's go. Peter Madsen, a Danish businessman known to many people as Rocket Madsen, was one of the most well-known entrepreneurs that lived in Copenhagen. He was an eccentric man, and he was a self-taught aerospace engineer who had built 3 submarines, a few rockets, delivered a popular TED Talk, and he was working on a personal rocket designed for human travel. It was all very impressive stuff. Kim Wall was an ambitious 30-year-old journalist who had written articles that had taken her all over the world. She lived in Copenhagen and desperately wanted Madsen to be one of her subjects for a long-form article that she would write and then have published. Kim was the type of girl who was remarkably intelligent and thirsty for adventure. She was always on the move, and her friends described the tiny little redhead as a little firecracker who was up for anything. Kim's articles were clearly not children's stories. She wrote big-time articles on topics such as social justice, climate change, and nuclear weapons testing. And Kim had been pushing hard for the past 4 months to try to get an interview with Madsen. She believed it would be a stellar piece to write and people would love it. And so when Kim looked at her phone on August 10th, 2017 and seen that a text message had come in at 5 p.m., she was surprised to see that the message was from Madsen. And this message was going to change the entire course of her life. In this message, Madsen was inviting her to his nearby workshop for a cup of tea. This was amazing news for Kim, but as ecstatic as she was to see this message come through, she couldn't help but think about how poorly timed it was, because Kim and her boyfriend Ollie were preparing to host their going-away party at that very moment. Kim and Ollie were moving from their Copenhagen home to Beijing, China in just 6 days. But Kim knew this was her only chance. If she wanted to get that interview before she left for Beijing, she had to do it now. So she gathered her stuff, told Ollie that she would be back as soon as she could, and then left to meet Madsen in his warehouse. And to Ollie's surprise, only 30 minutes later, Kim was back. But he quickly realized that she wasn't staying long. She scurried around, grabbing a couple things, and told Ollie that she was going for a 2-hour ride with Madsen in his Nautilus submarine, and that she was sorry, but she was going to end up missing the first few hours of their party. Ollie knew how important this was to Kim, and was completely supportive of her, so he gave her a quick kiss and told her to have fun and that he would see her soon. The Nautilus was a tiny little submarine that was only 58 feet long, and it was a submarine that Madsen himself had designed and built. He told Kim that they were going to take a quick trip around the bay surrounding Copenhagen, and she could interview him during the trip. It would work out perfectly, and she would even make it back before her party ended. It seemed like it was a total win-win for Kim. It was perfect. And so that Thursday evening, just before 7 p.m., while Kim was out on the submarine with Madsen, she texted Ollie a photo of the Nautilus with the message that read, "I'm still alive, by the way." And then a couple of minutes later, as Ollie was standing with some of their party guests along the waterside, they seen Kim waving to them from the tower of the submarine. And after that, Kim sent a final text to Ollie that said, "Going down now, I love you." And with that, Kim was gone, and nobody ever seen her alive ever again. Ollie sat there looking at the minutes on the clock tick by. Kim should have been back by now. It was 10 p.m., but there was no word from her, and no sign of the submarine at the pier. Ollie couldn't wait around for her to show up any longer. He was worried about her, and so he hopped on his bike and rode around the island searching for her in the dark. But no matter where he looked, she was never there. Finally, after he exhausted all of his options of where to look, at 2 a.m., Ollie called the police to report Kim missing. The Danish Navy did not waste any time mobilizing a full-scale maritime search operation in which they deployed helicopters, ships, and multiple private boats to help search the open waters for a mini-sub or potentially its stranded occupants. They hadn't received any distress calls that night, so they weren't really 100% sure that the stub was even still in the water. But after several hours of searching around for them, they finally located the Nautilus submarine. It was spotted floating in a bay south of Copenhagen. And upon closer inspection, Madsen could be seen in the submarine's tower. He then disappeared inside the tower for a moment, and then all of a sudden, there was this loud noise coming from the submarine. It sounded like a massive release of air that had been trapped under the water, and then seconds later, the submarine quickly started sinking. And while the sub was sinking, Madsen frantically climbed out of the sub and immediately dove into the water and started swimming to a boat that was floating nearby. Within 30 seconds of Madsen diving into the water, the submarine disappeared under the water's surface and sunk to the bottom. Madsen was rescued without suffering any injury. He didn't even seem shaken by the incident. And then immediately, he returned to Copenhagen, where he was the main attraction. He was a celebrity superstar who had just survived the sinking of his submarine. Every single television crew in the area wanted to get the first-hand account of what had happened, and Madsen was more than happy to be the star of the show, telling them that he had no time. He wasn't able to close any hatches or anything. He just had to get off the sub before he sank with it. And during this entire interview, there was not a single mention of Kim at all. Police needed to know where she was, and so since Madsen was the last person to see her, they began questioning him about where she was. But when the topic of Kim came up and the question of where she might be was asked, Madsen looked totally confused. According to him, he had dropped Kim off at the same pier where he had picked her up from the day before. And then he went on to explain that the two of them had gone on a quick cruise around the bay in the submarine while Kim interviewed him, and then, when all was said and done, he dropped her off without incident. And after that, once she was gone, he decided to go back out onto the waters in the submarine all by himself. The police, skeptically looking at Madsen, didn't believe him. Not one bit. Madsen's overly vague story of how the evening went was just too simple, especially since his submarine had sunk not long after his trip with Kim. They suspected that what had really happened was that he had intentionally sunk the submarine in an attempt to destroy any potential evidence. And since the police were not buying his story, they arrested him and accused him of having killed Kim in an unknown way and in an unknown place sometime after Thursday at 5 p.m. Effectively, he was being charged with involuntary manslaughter. The following weekend, Madsen walked into the closed-door court session looking confident and ready to tell what he knew. And it was then where he proceeded to change his story from what he had originally told the police. Without any hesitation, he confessed that he had lied about dropping Kim off at the pier, and then he went on to tell the court a story about a horrifying incident that was totally out of his control, and he was an innocent victim in all of it. He explained to the court how Kim's skull was crushed in a tragic accident when the hatch lid slipped from Madsen's fingers and went crashing down on her head, instantly killing her. After this happened, he panicked and pulled her body out of the submarine and then tossed her into the open water like nothing had happened. Madsen was fully confident in his story about what had happened to Kim, believing that if it was an accident and there was no body, he would be perfectly safe from any charges. What Madsen didn't know was that something was about to happen, and that something was going to expose him completely. The eccentric businessman who people found fascinating was actually an eccentric sexual deviant with an extremely horrifying fetish. On August 21st, a full 11 days after Kim had gone missing after the submarine ride with Madsen, a cyclist was riding along the shoreline of Amager Island when he came across something that had washed up on shore. Seeing this strange item laying there, he got off his bike to get a better look because he wasn't sure what it was he was looking at. He had never seen anything like it before, and as he was getting closer to this object, the cyclist came to the horrifying realization that he was looking at the torso of a human body that was missing its arms, its legs, and its head. Stumbling backwards away from this body, he quickly turned and ran to call the police. As soon as the authorities learned that a body had been found, divers were sent out into the waters to search the area both where the torso had been found and where the submarine had gone down, and during that month-long search, more body parts were found. Divers returned to the surface with plastic bags that had been weighed down with pieces of metal scraps, and in these bags they discovered a head and 2 legs. And later they found a 4th bag containing an orange fleece sweater, shoes, socks, and a black and white skirt along with a knife. And these pieces of clothing were confirmed to have been what Kim was wearing the night she went missing. With all of this evidence available, the investigators were able to use DNA from Kim's personal belongings to identify the body parts, and it was confirmed that all of the body parts did belong to Kim Wall. The medical examiner revealed that Kim had been stabbed a minimum of 15 times, with the vast majority of the stab wounds being inflicted in her lower private area. It was clear that this was a horrendous sexually motivated attack on Kim, and there was absolutely no question that Kim had been murdered. Medical examiners also found that there was no sign of any fractures or wounds to Kim's skull, meaning that Madsen's story about the hatch lid falling and crashing down on her head was totally made up. It just did not happen. But despite the discovery of Kim's dismembered body and the lack of damage to her skull, Peter Madsen stuck to his story, and he had nothing to say about how the mutilation to the body had happened. No comment whatsoever. Madsen had a secret side that nobody knew about. Madsen had a penchant for the more taboo sexual fetishes out there. So when forensic detectives searched Madsen's computer and iPhone, they were completely shocked to find over 100 snuff films on the devices. If you are not aware, a snuff film is a pornographic video of an actual murder. It was obvious that he had an extreme morbid desire for any type of video that depicted the violent death of a woman during sex. And this included decapitation, which his browser search history just happened to show that he had searched for just before the submarine ride with Kim. And as time went on and the prosecution built their case, Madsen changed his story yet again. This time, he suggested that Kim's death was a result of carbon monoxide poisoning, saying that he believed that she died from carbon monoxide poisoning while he was up on the deck. This was why there was no damage to Kim's skull. And surprisingly, during this confession, he also admitted to dismembering her and dumping the body parts in the sea, because once again, he panicked when he found her dead. Of course, nobody believed him, and the charges against him were changed from involuntary manslaughter to murder, indecent handling of a corpse, and sexual assault without intercourse. When he was asked why he decided to dismember and dump Kim's body if it was all just some tragic accident, Madsen said that he had suffered temporary psychosis. And when the prosecution pushed him to elaborate on what that meant, he eventually went into some detail, telling the court that the dismemberment of Kim's body was very unpleasant and not planned. He described how he had used a 19-inch sharpened screwdriver to put holes in her body because he needed to allow the gases to escape so that the body parts would not float after he dumped them in the water. As the trial went on, nobody could deny Madsen's obsession with snuff films. And this was especially true when it was revealed that he had confessed to a former mistress that his greatest sexual fantasy involved filming the murder of a woman while he and his friends dismembered the body. And then another witness testified that Madsen had been repeatedly inviting her onto the submarine just 2 days before Kim's death. The prosecution used this information to help establish that Kim's death was actually a premeditated murder, and it was proof that Madsen had actually been trying to lure women onto the submarine for some time. They also argued that Madsen showed premeditation when he brought along tools such as the 19-inch sharpened screwdriver and the saw, because these types of tools are not required on a submarine. On March 8, 2018, Peter Madsen was found guilty of murder, indecent handling of a corpse, and sexual assault, and was sentenced to life in prison. Here is the final photo taken of Kim when she was still alive, just before she went below the surface in the Nautilus submarine. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. Thank you for watching, and if you haven't already, please make sure to like, subscribe, and toss a comment below. Let me know what you think, because I'd love to find out. And I'm sorry if this video I sound a little rough. I am a little bit sick. So hopefully better next time. And I will see you again later.